What up guys, Shaquille Majuri here for Combat Culture, and as a gamer and UFC fan, I'm here to give you the most complete breakdown of EA UFC 4. Okay, so we're going to break down this review into 3 parts: gameplay, presentation, as well as the career mode. Now, we are fortunate enough to get our hands on an early review copy of EA UFC 4, so this is dropping right in time for you to make an informed decision before you hop into the game. First up, let's talk about the gameplay, separated into pros and cons. First thing I really like is they've fleshed out the types of submissions in the game. Before, all submissions fell under one minigame. Now it's separated into 2, depending on whether it's a choke submission or a joint submission. What I like about this system is it allows for a little bit more variety, a little bit more surprise, and 2 different things to focus on to really separate the idea of what the ground game is. What I don't love about the grappling is they haven't done a whole lot to actually build on the ground game. In the developer's defense, creating a complete hyper-realistic ground game is way harder than striking just because of how close contact you are and all the nuances of the ground game that depends on body-to-body contact. That being said, instead of overhauling the gameplay mechanics, what they've done is added a simplified version for newer fans of the game. The legacy controls for transitioning from position to position or initiating submissions or striking is still there for old EA UFC fans, but for new ones, there's a watered down, dumbed down version that basically does the work for you with 3 directions on the R stick that either improve your position towards ground and pound, towards seeking a submission, or towards mount. So you just kind of push the button in one way or the other, and they kind of automate the process for you. I'm not really a fan of this. Maybe this is just me being a old head about the EA UFC games, but it just kind of feels like instead of coming up with a way to make the grappling more robust, they've just sort of introduced shortcuts for people who don't want to learn the system or don't like the system. Now, striking. The striking has always been the strong suit of EA UFC 4, and they've built on it in some ways. Again, they seem to focus their attention a lot on the clinch and takedown aspects of this year's gameplay, which vastly improved, and we're going to get to it. But when it comes to the striking, there's one thing I like that they did and one thing I don't like that they did. On the downside, they didn't really add a whole lot when it comes to striking animations or striking gameplay, but here's an example of where they actually did a really good job with simplifying the striking combinations. Before, you had to input some ridiculous button combinations to get off unique strikes like an axe kick or a spinning wheel kick, sometimes having to push like 4 buttons at once. What they've done in this game is simplified the process by kind of eliminating how many buttons you have to press to initiate some strikes. What this does is allow for easier combinations, which I'm a huge fan of. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the clinch and the takedowns of the game. This is the bread and butter of EA UFC 4. Prior games, takedowns and clinches were initiated in such a way where they were a lot like the striking and grappling. It was its own sort of segment of the game, separated from the rest. What I really like that they've done in EA UFC 4 is they've kind of combined it. Now you can enter and exit a clinch very fluidly, allowing you to make short engagements, throw a knee, push someone to the cage, back out, circle, all done in a way that makes it feel like one cohesive gameplay mechanic. Takedowns have been simplified too. They are way easier to hit, way harder to block. Now this was, I think, a really interesting way to get around the striking heavy gameplay that has burdened previous UFC games. Now you need to be careful of the strikes you're throwing, and you need to be conscious of the fact that someone could initiate a takedown very easily if you're not doing a good job of space management. Hopping into online gameplay, what I found is that there are still techniques that players early on especially are really spamming that can be really difficult to get around, but because the new takedown mechanics are so much easier to hit, it's easy to counteract that spamming striking with grappling exchanges. One of my favorite things to do, for example, is when someone is spamming strikes that I'm having trouble timing or getting around, I get them in a Muay Thai plum and I throw a couple of knees. They back out of that. The next time I clinch and immediately go for a trip, a really nice fluid transition that they have between the clinch game and the takedowns. It mixes it up, it keeps people off their feet, and it gives me a very easy answer to people who are abusing gameplay mechanics on the striking end. One thing I really did not like about this year's EA UFC 4 is the tutorial. In previous iterations, they had a really great in-game tutorial that would teach you how to use some of the more advanced mechanics of the game, by showing you the techniques and then letting you perform them. This time, they just have videos that you have to watch, and not only is it super boring, but you don't get to practice live, which makes it way harder to retain the information. The best place if you're gonna look for a tutorial is the campaign, which starts the game off by exposing you to each of the elements in a more basic way, but in such a way that you'll get the principles of the game real quick. And last on the gameplay side, let's talk about the modes. They didn't introduce a whole lot of new modes into the offline gameplay, but the tournament mode, which includes a pride-style elimination, as well as the ability to create your entire event, main event down to the prelims, welcome addition. Online, on the other hand, has introduced something really cool called Blitz Battles. This is a tournament-style online mode with changing rule sets. So, for example, when I played Blitz Battle, it was a 5-round tournament with one 1-minute round. Super interesting. It was quick and snappy to get to, plus it really made you think, how am I going to most effectively use this 1 minute? For example, I could try and exchange in a striking battle, but if I find out that the other guy is better than me, I have next to no time to make up for it. I found myself relying a lot on a grapple-heavy strategy. Take them down, control, ride out the minute, boom. The Blitz Battles mode gets a huge thumbs up for me. The rule sets are constantly changing. It keeps it fresh, it keeps it exciting, and it's a lot of fun to play. Okay, let's move on to the presentation aspect of the game. First, pros. Man, the commentary is so much better than in previous games. Joe Rogan has notoriously hated doing the EA UFC commentary. It takes a long time, feels a little redundant to him, and that translated in the way that he was presented in the game. In fact, at one point, they just had to rehash his old lines, plus import stuff from actual UFC events, because Joe just didn't want to do it. This year, we're treated to Jon Anik and Daniel Cormier, who do an absolutely phenomenal job. They're enthusiastic, they're authentic, and they have a lot of great lines. Plus, there's this great chemistry, they're throwing jokes at one another, and it really adds a whole new realm of realism to the aesthetics of the game. Plus, people were wondering, like, what happens when Daniel Cormier is calling Daniel Cormier fight? It's pretty hilarious. Now, the small things, man, they nailed some of the smaller aspects of this game. When I was playing the career mode, which we'll get to later, you start off fighting in front of smaller crowds. So, for example, if I'm on the prelim of a UFC event, whether it be a pay-per-view or a fight night card, I don't get a full crowd. The full crowd comes generally in real shows during the main card. So if you find yourself playing career mode and a prelim of a UFC card, don't be surprised if the crowds are a little thin. This was a small touch, but something that I thought not only added realism to the game, but helped make those big moments worthwhile as you traversed up the card. The opening segment of the game immediately tosses you into the campaign. This is super well done. It feels authentic. You start as a regional fighter. I'm not going to give too much away, but it does so in such a way that you really feel like an MMA fighter working towards the dream of being a UFC champion. You get a little bit of behind the scenes stuff. You get a sense of what it's like to be a regional fighter and an amateur fighter, and it's super, super dope. Okay, if you're not a hip-hop head, you are gonna hate the soundtrack, but if you're into rap, you're gonna love it. Some of the notable inclusions on this album include Godzilla by Eminem featuring Juice WRLD, Middle Child by J. Cole, there's also entries by Rick Ross, and what almost feels like the entirety of Run the Jewels' R2J4 album, which I am not complaining about. I've heard that thing through at least a dozen times by now. Okay, sorry EA, sorry UFC, but I just gotta say, DJ Shadow is there with a song called Conform, which is all about how corporations use and abuse and manipulate the working man. Kinda rich considering who these companies are, but you know, I like the song. Okay, my only con when it comes to presentation and aesthetics is the limited graphical improvement. Honestly, these fighters don't look terrific. They look a lot like they did in EA UFC 3. I understand that it's still PS4, Xbox One generation. Maybe we'll see some improvements when they bump up to the next gen of consoles, but like I definitely wasn't blown away when I saw the character models. Okay, last up, let's talk about the career mode. I think the career mode is very improved, especially when you look back at like the original EA UFC, which kind of sucked. This career mode is actually pretty good. Let me go through the pros. First, pretty good character customization. I wasn't thrilled with the character models themselves, but the ability to change out a bunch of different gloves, shorts, it kind of moves away from the Reebok only aesthetic, which I'm a real big fan of. Anytime that you allow fans to express their creativity through their character models, I'm a huge fan of, so good on EA for that. Additionally, again, I'm going to stay away from too many spoilers when it comes to the career mode, but The game gives you a few different ways to get to the UFC. You start as an amateur, and from there you can either go into the WFA on the regional scene or get a boost straight to Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series. What you do from there will determine when and how you enter the UFC. I thought it was cool. It's nice to see a couple different ways to get to your eventual goal, and both are done quite well. Recommended career difficulty. This is a simple feature, but one that I really appreciate. The campaign takes you through a few amateur fights before you turn pro, and based on your performance in those amateur fights, the game will recommend a difficulty for you. I always think this is a great touch for players not all too familiar with the system, who aren't sure where they should play at. Thumbs up. Fighter evolution and sparring. Now, fighter evolution is the way that you improve your character from fight to fight, and it's done in a really interesting fashion. You get points by fighting and training that you can then put into any part of your character's skill tree, whether that's submissions, top control, kicks, punches, chin, heart. I really like the system because it means you can go about training in any way that you prefer, and your work from the fights and from the sparring sessions allow you to build your character the way that you want. That means you're not forced to grind one particular kind of training just to get points for that particular aspect of the game. You can go about training however you want, and you can build your character however you want. Plus, a really cool feature I found is if you use, let's say, a lot of jabs in your sparring sessions and your fights, you will get an automatic bonus to that skill just because you've used it so much. I think that's a really nice touch. Game plans. You can watch tape in this, which I think is really cool. It doesn't actually let you watch tape on your opponent, but you get a certain amount of points each week to spend on different aspects of training or promoting your fight. And one thing you can do is watch tape to learn things about your opponent, their overall, their striking style, how they might approach the fight. It's a really cool way to get some insight into a fight that you think will be particularly challenging. Okay, super small touch, but when you're sparring in the game soundtrack stops playing right to your audio and starts going through a speaker in the gym. So you hear it kind of muffled as if you were in a real training environment. Super small touch, but I appreciate that touch of realism. And last thing, in terms of what I like about the campaign, fight preparation has a lot of variety. You can train in different areas of the sport. You can build relationships with fighters who you can then invite to your gym so you can learn one of their particular skills. For example, I hit it up with Mark Casey. Mr. Bone Crusher taught me an axe kick. Thanks, Mark. Additionally, you can interact with fighters on social media to either build respect between you two or take it the other way and start a rivalry that'll make the fight more tense, make the fight more challenging, and draw more eyeballs to your match. You can also sign sponsors, do sponsorship events, promote your fight on social media. Lots of ways to go about how you want to spend your week in fight camp. 3 things I don't love about the career mode. 1, the training can get kind of long sometimes, and although there's a lot of variety, it does get a little draining. It feels like I'm spending so much time in camp for such a short fight. I mean, it's realistic, definitely makes sense, but not the most fun as a consumer. I don't know how well the simulation works. You do still get some points to spend on your character, but I'm not sure if it's enough to justify skipping the camp. Maybe it is. I just didn't play that much. Additionally, this is a huge bummer for me. EA UFC 3 had an awesome face scan. You take a few pictures of yourself online, upload it to EA's website, and they would scan your character into the game. They had this across their FIFA games as well, and it was really, really well done. There is nothing like seeing my face bloodied and beaten and bruised in a video game to add a sense of tension to the gameplay. And it seems like they've outright removed their scanning from their website. So that was a huge bummer because that for me absolutely was the number one thing that created an immersive experience. Additionally, I touched on this a little bit before, although the character customization in terms of clothing, gear is really well done. I had a lot of trouble with the character faces. A lot of them looked ridiculous, unrealistic, so I didn't even want to default to them. And trying to morph my face took ages. You have to move the slider left or right for, the bridge of your nose, your jaw, etc., but the toggles move super slow, and there didn't seem to be like a trigger I could hold to slide it faster. So after trying to get just through like my forehead, I was exhausted. I said, forget it. I went with the default character that looked nothing like me. Doesn't take away from the gameplay, but really takes away from how invested you are in your character. So, final thoughts, EA UFC 4. Man, the presentation, biggest improvement in the game without a doubt. They've got a huge roster, over 230 characters strong, plus some really interesting pre-order exclusive characters. The gameplay vastly improved when it comes to clinches and takedowns, although the rest of it feels very, very familiar. If you really like the in-game mechanics, striking, grappling in EA UFC 3, this builds on that, so you're really gonna love it. If you thought that the gameplay mechanics were very problematic, I don't think they've done enough to address your concerns. The online aspects of the game feel very similar, so if you thought the old games were very laggy, you're gonna get the same experience. If you thought that it was fluid enough, well, chances are that'll be the same. For me, you notice some lag, but generally nothing that took away too much from the gameplay experience. I'm Shaquille Majuri for Combat Culture, and that is your EA UFC 4 review from a gamer and a UFC fan. If you enjoyed the video, the best way you can help the channel grow is by hitting subscribe and tapping the notification bell. Leave us a like and let us know, are you going to get EA UFC 4? What would you like to see implemented in it? You guys stay safe, and we'll catch you next time.